HDMI 2.1 is fully upon us, and we're starting 2024 with quite a few new capture card reviews over the next month or so. But this one might be my shortest, as I'm the most disappointed in it. And in a way, that feels kind of unfair. The AVerMedia Live Gamer 4K 2.1 is a fine capture card, and many creators will use it and have a fine time. But the whole thing just feels like a massive shortcut. I'll explain as we go. The Live Gamer 4K 2.1 is a $270 PCIe capture card that goes inside your PC that you would use to capture game consoles or a second PC. The differentiating factor with this new model over AVerMedia's previous offerings is the support for HDMI 2.1 pass-through. That's the new HDMI spec that allows for 4K 120Hz and 144Hz on fancy new monitors and OLED TVs, as well as variable refresh rate, the ability for your display to adjust its refresh rate on the fly to match your in-game frame rate. Previous generations of capture cards did not support the new HDMI standard and could not pass through or capture these formats. So what does this new capture card support? Well, it can pass through 4K up to 144Hz in HDR or SDR and with variable refresh rate or VRR enabled. 1440p can be passed through in up to 240Hz, including HDR and VRR, and 1080p can be passed through in up to 360Hz, including HDR and VRR. Capture-wise, it's a lot more complicated. Capture is limited to 60 FPS at 4K. It cannot capture the full 120 FPS at 4K, and it cannot even capture 4K 60 in HDR. 4K 60 can only be captured in the NV12 color space, which is uncompressed 420 color, and it's perfectly fine for streaming or recording applications where scaling isn't happening after the fact, but it's not great for punch-ins or maintaining detail in text or intense color grading, that kind of thing. HDR, which is via the P010 color space, can only be captured in 30 FPS at 4K. YUY2 for 422 color space is limited to 50 frames per second. 1440p can be captured in 120 frames per second in NV12. This can be done from a 4K 120 signal if you want to prioritize capture frame rate over resolution, or from a 1440p 120 or 1440p 240 source. 1440p can be captured in HDR or the better color fidelity formats such as XRGB for 444 color or YUY2 in 60 FPS. 1080p can be captured up to 240 FPS in NV12 and then in 120 FPS in all of the other formats, which is pretty nice. 2560 by 1080 ultra-wide can be captured up to 120 FPS in NV12, and 3440 by 1440 ultra-wide can be captured in 60 FPS in NV12 or YUY2. Here's why I'm not happy with this. First, the ultra-wide formats and HDR support is a downgrade from last generation. The previous generation Live Gamer 4K could capture 4K 60 FPS in full 444 XRGB color or in HDR. This new card can do neither. 3440 by 1440 could be captured in the full 100 FPS that the pass-through supported. This new one can't do that. Plus, this new card doesn't see any upgrades to the ultra-wide pass-through support. Secondly, there's no 120 FPS capture at 4K. Yeah, that'd be a lot of data, and no, not everyone would care about that. But when the last generation Live Gamer 4K launched to capture the 4K generation of consoles, AVerMedia came out swinging with full XRGB support, HDR compatibility, ultra-wide support, and so on. Formats that Elgato had not yet prioritized, but AVerMedia did. Elgato has since caught up on those formats, and now AVerMedia seems to be abandoning their position as leader in terms of supported specs and flexibility in the gaming space. My suspicion, and I've seen it shared by many of you online, is that while this is technically a PCIe device, what AVerMedia have done is just repackaged the Live Gamer Ultra 2.1 USB card onto a PCIe card instead of making two discrete products. It just doesn't make sense that the full-fat PCIe device would be limited to the same specs as the USB device, especially when the last generation PCIe card supported more in terms of capture. This is hugely disappointing. Again, the card works as intended, but I don't see why they are withholding the goods, so to speak, other than cynical cost-cutting measures or trying to ensure we buy an upgraded Pro model in a couple years with those features enabled. Which, given we've already been waiting over 3 years to get HDMI 2.1 capture cards to begin with, I'm just not feeling it. Input latency to the OBS preview on this card is great, looking at around 60.5 milliseconds, which is competitive, and it's nice to see that cards continue to trend faster with the latency. Briefly testing some retro formats, 480p seems to capture fine. The 4x3 1920 by 1440 mode from the RetroTink 5X Pro and the PlayStation 2 Retro Gem Scaler works fine too. It does automatically stretch it to 16:9, so you'll need to squish it back with an aspect ratio adjustment filter in OBS for 4x3 games. Oh yeah, I also just wanted to mention that the Live Gamer 4K 2.1 does not work with AVerMedia's RECentral capture program just yet. That update is coming, but it doesn't yet, so you'll just have to use OBS to make it work, which is fine, but I get a lot of comments asking about capture programs and whatever. The design of this new card is sleek and minimal overall, but there's a massive RGB bar across the whole side of the thing, and without RECentral, you have no control over it, so enjoy your unicorn vomit. I hate to be so hard on a capture card that honestly functions fine. If you buy this card, you'll get the ability to pass through your PlayStation 5, Xbox Series S or X, or modern graphics card to your fancy new monitor or TV for 4K 120Hz or 1440p 240Hz gaming and stream it, capture it, whatever. It works with older consoles just fine, and you can capture great quality gameplay videos for streaming or content creation. But it just sucks that they limited so much from its potential. I could forgive the lack of 120 FPS recording at 4K. I don't think we're gonna see that from the gaming cards anytime soon, but the other limitations are just plain silly. Products this expensive should never be downgraded from previous generations. My personal recommendation is to just wait a little longer. Elgato's HDMI 2.1 capture cards are releasing on February 1st, so just wait for reviews for those before you make your decision. Links to the card will be in the description below if you just can't wait. Go check out this review to see how AVerMedia's new USB card compares, or this video to see what a day in my life looks like for work. I'm Addy, your stream professor, and remember to be kind. Rewind.